Bethesda United Methodist Church. What a beautiful house of worship in Salisbury's Newtown neighborhood. Its Gothic design is described as a traditional medieval plan with an entrance and bell tower that fronts a cross-shaped nave and transept. Thousands of members and visitors have worshiped, studied, enjoyed fellowship, and served here over the past 100 years, and have all been part of Bethesda's history. The history of Methodism in the United States began not far from Salisbury, Maryland. When Thomas Coke bumped into Francis Asbury after a worship service at Barrett's Chapel in Frederica, Delaware, he shared important news. John Wesley had sent him to ordain Asbury and appoint him superintendent of a new Methodist church in the United States. After worship at Barrett's Chapel, Asbury and Coke decided to call a special conference for all the Methodist preachers in the United States. They would meet at Lovely Lane Meeting House in Baltimore, Maryland, beginning December 24, 1784, to found and organize a new church known as the Methodist Episcopal Church.
In 1827, a disagreement about the power and tenure of bishops led to a major conflict among the Methodist Episcopal ministers and laymen. A group of those dissidents organized a new church, initially named the Associated Methodist Church, but in 1830 it was changed to the Methodist Protestant Church. In the mid-1800s, the Salisbury area was part of the Sussex Circuit of the Methodist Protestant Church. In a letter written by Reverend William Morgan, dated October 12, 1841, Bethesda's beginning was revealed.
After a camp meeting at Philip Mills, the general impression of the public was very favorable. Immediately after the camp meeting ended, our ministers were solicited to take up an appointment at Salisbury. Brother George D. Hamilton answered to the call, and the spirited inhabitants expect to have a large and commodious house of worship erected in that town by Christmas next.
The large and commodious house of worship, spoken of in the Morgan letter, was begun in 1842 on land on Camden Avenue, at the top of a slight rise from the Wycomico River. At present, this property is known as 329 Camden Avenue. There were 18 charter members to start the organization, referred to as the Camden Avenue Chapel, sharing a circuit preacher with 9 churches. December 15, 1841, has always been taken as the anniversary date for the organization of our church, known to us today as Bethesda.
As the town of Salisbury and the congregation grew, its members now lived not only in the Camden section, but in all parts of town. It seemed necessary and desirable to build a larger building at a more central location in town. A lot on Broad Street, opposite the Presbyterian Church, was acquired and the work begun. The church was originally located where Route 50 is today. On the last Sabbath in October 1870, the chapel part of the new church at Salisbury was dedicated to the worship of God with appropriate ceremonies. The fully completed building was dedicated on Sunday, February the 18th, 1872, after a concerted effort by those who pledged the necessary funds to complete it. Fortunately, the church property was not affected by the disastrous fire of 1886, so progress went on. The entire cost of the building, which would include a church, chapel, and Sunday school room, was about $7,100. The church saw much growth during the late 1870s and early 1900s due to numerous revivals and conversions. This growth required further renovation of the Sunday school room, and in 1902, the auditorium was rebuilt and a pipe organ installed. As the church flourished and continued to grow, at the suggestion of Mr. E.W. Windsor, The beautiful biblical name of Bethesda, House of Mercy and Healing, was adopted in 1896 as the official name of the church. Just 2 years later, in 1898, Bethesda became a station with its own full-time pastor. By 1912, membership was up to about 600, with over 500 in Sunday school, so leaders agreed that plans must be made for a larger building. Dr. Richard Shipley was appointed to Bethesda in the spring of 1919 and would bring the plans for a new church building to fruition. In the winter of 1921, on the corner of North Division and William Streets, the Todd property became available and seemed the ideal location for the new church in this beautiful residential section. This property was purchased at a cost of $17,500. A fine church architect, George Savage from Philadelphia, was commissioned to draw plans, which were then put out to contractors for bids. An agreement was reached between the builders, Hastings and Parsons Company, and Bethesda Methodist Protestant Church in the amount of $99,742. Pamphlets outlining the space limitations in the existing church building were mailed to the congregation, and June 5th was announced as the day when pledges for the cost of the new building would be received, payable on a 5-year basis. It was indeed a day of rejoicing, for the tremendous sum of $96,000 of the needed amount was promised that day by the 610 dedicated members, who pledged sacrificially of their funds, their individual talents, and support for the realization of their hopes and dreams. Work began in the fall on the removal of the house from the lot. The breaking of ground for the new structure took place on November 1st, 1921. This picture of the dedication service shows a crowd of Bethesda's most active and loyal members at that time, including children and young people.
By Sunday, March 19, 1922, the foundation was complete and ready for the cornerstone to be laid. This momentous occasion was attended by most of the church's members. What a glorious day it was for Bethesda Methodist Protestant Church. A reporter for the Wicomico News stated, "The stone was lowered to its place. The first trowel of cement was laid by Mr. William Humphrey Rounds, the senior male member of the church, and the second was laid by Master Samuel Tillman Morris, the youngest member, who had united with the church at the morning service." Bethesda's pastor, Reverend Shipley, as well as church leaders and visiting pastors, are seen here, gathered for the cornerstone ceremony. The gentleman holding the cornet, providing music for the occasion, was my grandfather, Mr. Raymond Wimbrow.
The diagonal axis on the corner lot, coupled with its 3-story tower, provided the church with a commanding presence surely intended by the architect and the congregation. The masterfully crafted work of erecting the beautiful Mount Airy granite walls with limestone trim, placing the art glass windows, and finishing all the interior work took more than a year. There were stonemasons, carpenters, as well as a host of other tradesmen working together to complete the church. The cornerstone from the Broad Street church was removed and embedded in the wall of the front vestibule of the new church. The pews from the Broad Street church were removed and donated to John Wesley Methodist Episcopal Church an African American church also on Broad Street. It is now known as the Chipman Cultural Center, where our original pews can be seen today. The new church sanctuary was designed with a warm, uniquely inviting interior. Wooden beams draw one's eyes to the ceiling and hint at a heavenward gaze. The overall format of the sanctum was in the shape of a cross, with the nave, center aisle, transepts to the right and left in a cruciform style, and the chancel. Consistent with architectural traditions of the Romanesque and Gothic Christian churches, the pastoral pulpit was centered in the cross design. Complementing the interiors was the placement of leaded colored glass in the arch window openings. The resurrection window in the front of the tower in the balcony was a beautiful signature piece in memory of those who had given memorial windows in the Broad Street Church. Attached to the back of the church was a 2-story Sunday school room that followed what was known at the time as the Akron Plan. A center assembly room on each floor was ringed with small classrooms partitioned by curtains. The center space on the main floor was perfect for the men's Sunday school class, a group of over 300. The adult and youth departments of the Sunday school met for many years in those small classrooms behind the open space. The day finally arrived for Bethesda Methodist Protestant Church to move to its new home. June 3, 1923 was a red-letter day in the history of Bethesda Church. In fact, the whole week from June 3rd to June 10th was used for celebration. This program from that service is truly a treasured memento from that occasion. On Sunday morning at 9 a.m., a congregation of men, women, and children, said to number 800, met at the old Broad Street Church. A brief service was held there, and a procession was formed 2 by 2, beginning with the small children through the older classes to adults, to march to the new church, singing hymns as they went. A newspaper article in the Wicomico Weekly described the procession, saying, quote, "The line stretched from the old church to the new and made a beautiful sight." That famous walk was commemorated by Bethesda members on the 75th anniversary of this building in 1998, and again in 2023 on the 100th anniversary. In the fall of 1925, Mr. Oscar L. Morris, a loyal and devoted member, met with a tragic accident, and by his will left the very sizable legacy of nearly $30,000 to Bethesda Church. By the action of the Board of Trustees, it was decided to apply $20,000 to the church debt and the remainder to 2 special projects. The first project was a plan to have a large religious painting placed in the choir loft. The second project would be the creation of a Sunday school library. Dr. Shipley suggested that $5,000 of the legacy be used for such a painting. He knew Mr. Edwin H. Blashfield, a very noted artist of New York, and contacted him to paint a figure of Christ. Mr. Blashfield's outstanding reputation was due to his paintings of cherubs and Greek gods and goddesses in the Capitol and Library of Congress, but he felt very unworthy to attempt a figure of Christ. At the insistence of Dr. Shipley and the encouragement of Mr. Blashfield's wife, he agreed to depict Christ as the Good Shepherd, and when he and his assistant had completed the work, he and others considered it his masterpiece. It was dedicated on Sunday, November 7th, 1926. This mural has been an untold inspiration to the thousands who have sat before it from that time until now. The years flew by, and soon it was the 10th anniversary of the new church building. On Sunday, June 11th, 1933, the 10th anniversary was marked with special services, and those attending Sunday school marched in procession to the auditorium, which is where their worship services were held. In the 1930s, Bethesda Protestant Church continued to thrive, and the membership grew from 800 to 1,500. By about 1940, the membership of the church and church school had become so large that it became necessary to add more full-time workers to the staff, and the physical facilities of the beautiful building were becoming inadequate, so additional property had to be acquired. When the Graham property on North Division Street, adjoining the church, went on the market in 1942, Bethesda purchased it and renovated it as a church house for additional space for the church office, young adult Bible class, junior department of the church school, and Boy and Girl Scout activities. A dedication was held in February of 1946. Today, that building houses our administrative offices. A home next door to the church on West William Street was purchased as a parsonage, as the previous parsonage was too expensive to maintain. When the home of Miss Catherine Todd on the corner of William and Park Avenue was to be sold, it was thought wise to acquire it for future use. It was purchased by a group of laymen and deeded to the church. The Todd House was renovated into 2 beautiful apartments, which were rented for several years until the junior high department of the church school began to use it. Today it is used for Bible study groups, ladies' circle meetings, receptions, and occasionally small weddings are held in the chapel. Due to restricted street parking, the backyards of the parsonage and church house had to be sacrificed to create a black-topped parking lot. But even this did not provide adequate space for the large requirements of our congregation, so the entire block of the Oaks development along North Division Street from Isabella to Oakdale Road was purchased and beautified with grass and shrubbery to give additional parking space. By the late 1950s, there had been a desire to modernize the church school rooms, take out the balconies which had become outmoded, and put in a second floor to give more space. In the winter of 1960, the organ, which had given valiant service for 37 years, began to fail, and it was found that the cost of rebuilding was not justified at its age, and a new organ would be necessary. To provide room for the larger organ, the chancel would need to be enlarged, so the official board and the congregation voted that the time had come for extensive changes in the interior of the building. The first step in the renovation was the placing of 12 art glass panels in the 6 side windows of the sanctuary, as well as in the front vestibule door and the side balcony windows and transepts. All of these were given by families as memorials. Another memorial gift was the baptismal font. The work on the Sunday school rooms and the sanctuary was completed in 1961, and the new $47,000 organ was installed in 1962. The new chancel was extended back 12 feet and our lovely mural of the Good Shepherd, encased in a heavy frame carved with religious symbols, became the focal point of interest above the new altar. Altar appointments of custom-made cross and 8 candlesticks of wood ornamented with brass were memorial gifts. Pews were added for choir members, and a new pulpit and lectern were handsomely carved. The Sunday school now had rooms for the nursery and kindergarten departments, Sunday school secretary's office, and pastor's office. There were robing rooms for both men and women on the first floor, and the primary and senior high departments were on the second floor. The junior high department occupied the second floor of the Todd House. The total cost of all these improvements was approximately $210,000. Since the 1960s, we have continued to make many needed improvements as well as continual maintenance projects in order to preserve and maintain the structural integrity and beauty of our buildings. In the hymn, "We Are the Church," authors Richard Avery and Donald Marsh wrote, "The church is not a building. The church is not a steeple. The church is not a resting place. The church is a people." Bethesda Church has continued its legacy since 1841, the most recent 100 years of which have been cherished in this beautiful building. Loyal, dedicated people have called Bethesda their church and worked hard to support it through the years. Bethesda's mission statement, "Grow deep, branch out, bear fruit," exemplifies our strong faith as we study, reach out to others, and serve. We take part in worship services, both traditional and contemporary, Sunday school, Bible study, and confirmation classes. Our outstanding music program includes an adult choir, a handbell choir, and a youth bankestra. Our active youth group meets regularly and takes part in mission projects throughout the year. A very active United Methodist men's group and 8 circles of United Women in Faith serve Bethesda and our community in many ways. The Kindred Fellowship Group, Boy Scouts, continuing outreach and missions opportunities, as well as numerous committees and people working behind the scenes, ensure that Bethesda continues to be the church it was intended to be.
The existence of this church building is a story of love, courage, and adventure. Just think of the faith and hope that guided our forefathers when they built this church. They didn't have the equipment, money, or expertise we have today, but they had tremendous faith in their generation and those to follow. They designed a building to stand for ages as a house of worship. There must have been numerous times when they thought it would never be paid for, but it has been time and again. Through the years, each generation of our church family has had its trouble, wars, depression, turmoil. But with faith and devotion, they have faced these trials, grown in Christian spirit, trained and inspired others to continue in God's work, and added their love gift to the legacy passed on to us. Today, we are the Bethesda family, and we are fortunate to have this beautiful sanctuary in which to gather for worship. Love is all around us when we sit in these pews, and we are especially aware of it when we look at the painting of Jesus as our shepherd. Our burdens and sorrows are lightened when we are reminded that we, his lost sheep, are in his care. Let's cherish and nurture this legacy so that the light of Bethesda will shine brightly deep into the future. Written by Mistel Towers, 1992.